Thank you. Very good morning to everyone to this beautiful October morning here in New Delhi. A warm welcome to the excellencies representing the country membership of CDRI, representatives of member organizations, senior officials from the ministries of Government of India, our international experts, CDRI fellows, and the whole CDRI family and friends. Thank you for your presence here to celebrate this important milestone for the coalition, the convocation of the first cohort of the fellowship, and the consolidation of learnings from the DRI research convening. I would now, this day, before I miss, it is important because all of you all know this is the International Day of Disaster Risk Reduction. What better way to celebrate it than have this sharing and diving deep into insights that have emerged over the past 2 days. I would now like to welcome Mr. Kamal Kishore, Member Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority, India, and CDRI Executive Committee Co-Chair to please come and address you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aishwarya, and a very good morning to everyone. And I would like to wish you a very happy International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. So it's a very important day. Today is also, we are almost at the midpoint of the Sendai framework. Today is 7 years, 7 months, and a few days from the adoption of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And in March, on 18th March of 2015, late in the night in Japan, we adopted the framework, and we committed ourselves to working towards 7 targets, which were realistic yet ambitious. We had a lot of hope, optimism, and resolve. Yet, we can see that the progress is not very encouraging. Out of the 7 targets, I can say that except one, I think it's target E, which is on plans and strategies, the world is falling behind on all of those. There isn't a single target where we can say that we are heading towards meeting them in 2015. So the news is not really that good. We have been through, or we are still within a certain phase of the pandemic, which has exposed the vulnerabilities in the global system. So it's really a sobering moment for all of us. And out of the 6 targets that we are not meeting, the one we are lagging behind the most is target D, which deals with reducing losses in critical infrastructure. And hence, the importance of what CDRI is doing, what we've been doing, the international community working on disaster risk reduction has been doing, and particularly the emphasis on resilient infrastructure. So I think that sort of establishes the importance of this work. I talked about the bad news that we are not meeting targets. At the same time, there are glimmers of hope. It's not all gloom and doom. If you look at mortality from wet and windy conditions, cyclones and floods, particularly from cyclones, if you live in a cyclone-prone area now, compared to 20 years ago, the likelihood of you suffering serious losses is like a third. In countries like my own, here in India, we've reduced cyclone mortality by 98% over 15 years. Likewise, mortality from heat waves have come down. We've had severe heat waves this year across the world. But in many parts of the world, we are actually seeing ways to tackle these things. So there is, it's a sobering moment because we are not really meeting the targets. But at the same time, there are several glimmers of hope that we know what needs to be done and there is a way forward. So with that, let me turn to specifically the subject of today's event and what we've been doing over the last 3 days, which is focusing on and 3 years too. So 3 years and last 3 days as well. So this focus on building capacity, building an integrative framework for working on disaster resilient infrastructure is really important. So in the last 3 days, there has been a focus on developing a common language, lexicon for disaster resilient infrastructure. We've been working on setting a research agenda, which will lead to a publication. We've been working with CDRI fellows from across the world, from CDRI's membership. So all of that today is basically a culmination of that effort. And going forward, I have 3 expectations or 3 hopes, if you like, from this whole effort. I think if you look at some specific elements of disaster resilient infrastructure, if you want to look at how to make bridges earthquake resilient, or how to make power lines withstand strong winds, there are full-scale laboratories that actually test these pylons. But in the world that we live in now, all of this really needs to work across disciplines. We can't leave this only to engineers or only to planners or only to financial decision makers or only to sociologists. It really requires a systems approach. If we are talking about an interconnected, interdependent system, global system of infrastructure systems, then a systemic problem also requires a systemic response. So I really hope that we are able to generate enthusiasm around an integrative approach to research on disaster resilient infrastructure. And that is what is reflected in the first cohort of CDRI fellows that are with us today, as well as second cohort. I'm also hoping that this integrative research is something, of course, CDRI is trying to do at the global scale with its membership, but this is something which we can foster at the national and subnational levels as well. So I would like to see these kinds of efforts percolating down to the local level as well. So I think that's one clear hope that we can make a movement towards an integrative approach to studying, researching disaster resilient infrastructure. The second thing is that history is full of research efforts that do not actually meet the problem on the ground, and they leave a lot to be desired in terms of applications. So more and more, I think it will be good if we can bring together the producers and users of research in the same room at all levels. I think that is exceedingly important. Any problem you highlight, and it seems that somebody has researched on it, but somehow it hasn't really been operationalized. So I think that is the second hope I have, that we bridge the gap between research and its application. And my final point is really looking at how we inspire at the national level systems of higher education at the national level to really orient itself towards addressing not only the classical problems that have been with us for more than a century, but also problems of the 21st century. How do we bring new imagination into our urban planning education? How do we bring in new imagination in our architectural education? I mean, I'm an architect and urban planner, so those two came first, but it applies to other disciplines as well. So I think that is really something, what is the kind of advocacy role this group can play in, informing education policy, higher education policy in our countries. So with that, I'm really honored to be here with all of you and to engage in this conversation. This is one step towards a long journey. And as I said, that this is likely to be a key contribution to meeting Target D of Sendai Framework, several sustainable development goals that talk about infrastructure and resilient infrastructure. And well past 2030, this is really, there is a saying in Hindi, and I'll try to say that in English, that if you want to sort of reap rewards in the next season, you plant a flower pot or something, and you'll see by spring it will give you flowers. If you want something in your lifetime, you plant a tree, you plant a mango tree, and your children will enjoy mangoes. But if you want to serve the humanity for a long time, invest in your people. And that's the spirit of this work. We invest in ourselves, invest in our people. I'm particularly thankful for our team at CDRI for pulling this together. We have the international jury members from across the world who have steered, mentored, encouraged the fellowship program. Our two technical teams in CDRI that have mentored this whole efforts. Above all, our membership, we have honorable ambassadors from several countries today engaging in this conversation, from Madagascar, Netherlands, Jamaica, Peru, and Tajikistan. We are encouraged by your presence here, and we look forward to working with you all. And above all, I think this whole thing cannot succeed without the enthusiasm of the fellows themselves, for whom we are doing the convocation today. So I think we should really applaud their enthusiasm and energy for coming together, working with us. And also, in many ways, challenging us in thinking out of the box and thinking new ways, challenging conventional ways of doing that. It's really about them, this whole program. So thank you very much, and look forward to staying engaged in this conversation.
As Kamalji mentioned, over the last few days, we've been diving deep into the action agenda for adaptive pathways for resilient infrastructure and in an increasingly uncertain future. We have some delegates here from the conference who will provide a glimpse of the conversations that have happened. I welcome Dr. Push Bajaj, Dr. Parisa Kloss, Dr. Kampanath Silva, and Dr. Liesel Kiem on the stage. And I'd like to request Professor Ilan Noy to moderate this discussion. Thank you.
Very good. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's especially a pleasure because I get to moderate this distinguished panel. My name is Ilan, and I've been stuck in the ivory tower for the past 30 years. But fortunately for me and for you, the people in this panel have not done the same, and they've left the ivory tower and went down to the world, maybe put on their shining armor, climbed on a horse, and took a lance and went into the battlefield. So with me in the panel are Liesl Kim, who is the lead for climate change agenda for the Australian government's partnership for infrastructure, and she's been working with most of the countries in Southeast Asia and ASEAN specifically. I also have Parisa Kloss, who is the executive director of Resilient Urban Planning and Development Company, which is situated in Düsseldorf in Germany. I also have, back at the end there, Kampanart Silva, who is a researcher at the National Energy Technology Center in Thailand, in Bangkok, and Pushp Bajaj, who is a research fellow and head of the Blue Economy and Climate Change Cluster at the National Maritime Foundation. Also, fortunately for us, both Cam and Pushp were also part of the first cohort of the fellows, the CDRI fellows that we are celebrating their convocation today. So what we are going to do, and this is, I want you to start thinking, is we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, a few questions, and they will tell us a few things. And then we will solicit questions from the audience. So while you are listening to us, please, by all means, think of questions. Please think of provocative questions, questions that will try to push us and CDRI forward in the direction that Kamal Kishore just suggested, or maybe in other directions if you disagree with what Kamal has said. So by all means, think of questions that you want to ask the panel. Okay, I'm going to start with Liesl, if you don't mind. I'm going to start with a really easy question for you. How can we link all the production and this output we get from research into actual practice in the practice community? I know it is a really easy question, so please.
Okay, thank you. I'm not a technology specialist, as you say. Thank you, Ilan, and thank you to the organizers and the introductory speech. As Kamal touched on, this transition from research to implementation or practice is the resounding gap, I guess, for us and those of us in the room over the past few days. My perspective, somewhat different. I was upgraded undeservingly to doctor, but I'm not a doctor. In fact, my perspective is more from the practitioner perspective. And I guess on that point, my lens for the last few days has been thinking about, as I experienced the incredible breadth and impressive technical knowledge that was brought to the table by the fellows on, going quite deep on technical issues, quite broad the range of sectors. There's an incredible wealth of knowledge there, and how do I bring that to the work that I do? And I guess the context there is that we should not underestimate how low the starting point is outside of our sector and our space. We have these conversations with each other, and we assume, we've been doing it for years, we have, such a good baseline understanding. But I work with technical specialists, for example, one environmental specialist who was saying to me in passing once, this part is to do with greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, is it mitigation or adaptation? I always get the terms confused. I can't remember which is which. These are specialists. I've had M&E officers for programs, or just general technical people try to explain mitigation as the mitigating the impacts of climate change. That, again, mitigation, adaptation, like some things that we take for granted. So whilst we're going into very deep technical areas, we should understand that packaging these pieces of work up along the way and communicating it very simply is going to progress practice. significantly. You know, the starting point is quite low, and practitioners are actually quite good in this space. They're very good at adopting. When something is spoon-fed to them or handed to them or made easily, they will adopt it and integrate it. They're keen to keep up with the latest developments, and they're aware that they're not tapped into always what's happening in the research space. So if we can parcel it out there. Finally, I'm sure I'm about to get called on time, but I think the point about practitioners and education systems is particularly important. The urban planner and architect gave those examples as a climate practitioner. My context is that I have no professional association as a climate practitioner, you know, whereas the professional bodies for climate or disaster risk specialists. And how is that a professional body? Are they embedded in other institutions? How are we engaging with those professional bodies which are shaping the agenda for the practitioners to get the information out there? Thank you.
Thank you, Liesl. I'm sure we will come back to this theme because it seems to be a very important one. Pushp, if I may, you told me that you work in a 1.5 organization, which is somewhere in between a government organization and a private sector one. So for you, it must be a challenge to communicate with government, which is where decisions are usually being made. So can you tell us a little bit about how you communicate?
Yes, certainly. You know, and this also, I mean, this is something that we have been discussing in the past couple of days as well, that how do you effectively communicate and connect with the policymakers and with the practitioners, as Liesl already mentioned. And you know, this is something that we deal with regularly in our own research, that, you know, especially when it comes to climate change, we tend to get lost in the global trends, and you know, when we speak to the policymakers, we kind of start with the rising global average temperatures and changing extreme weather events, which you know doesn't really connect with them at a personal level. And so what we have found in our own research is that when you bring it down to the local context and to you know their own surroundings and how it's going to affect their assets, then you see an immediate change in reaction. You know, so just to share an anecdote, in our project for the CDRI fellowship, we were looking into climate resilience of seaport infrastructure. And so when you speak to the port authorities and you know, talk to them about the impacts of climate change that they need to worry about, and if you start with, again, global average temperatures and precipitation changes, it doesn't ring a bell. And then when we went to the part of giving them some visualizations, some maps which show, for example, how many which regions are expected to be below tidal level, below sea level by a certain year, then there is an immediate change in reaction because you know it hits home and it tells them what they need to do in order to address that. And another element within that is also the timeline. You know, this is also something that we need to be mindful of, that when we speak of climate change timelines, we often get lost in the end of the century kind of timelines, but that doesn't concern you know, most local officials, local government officials. What concerns them is more in the decadal, you know, 10 years, 15 years timeline, which we have to be mindful of. You know, another thing, speaking of communication, this was also brought up by Aishwarya when she was giving the opening remarks, that we are entering into a very uncertain world. And this uncertainty, especially when it comes to climate change, you know, the future projections that we have, the modeling that we have available, although it has grown by leaps and bounds in the last few decades, you know, just 10 years ago, 20 years ago, our models were very primitive, and now they're far more superior. But even so, we still don't know enough about the natural world to predict the future with certainty. And so there is a significant amount of uncertainty in future climate projections, and that again becomes our responsibility as researchers, as experts, to communicate that effectively. You know, again here, if I could share one more example, just looking at sea level rise, the primary source of information for policymakers is the IPCC, you know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And if you look at the IPCC reports and you just look at the very conveniently placed summary for policymakers, it gives you some numbers. it will tell you that by the year 2100, we are expecting, 0.8, 1 meter of sea level rise. But we know as scientists, as researchers, that those numbers are only supposed to be the guiding numbers. And if you go into the fine print, you realize that there is a possibility of sea level rise being far greater than what is being projected in the climate models. And surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, but for the first time in the last IPCC report, the 6th assessment report, the IPCC actually acknowledged this in the main results. They had what they called a high impact, low likelihood storyline, in which they talked about the uncertainties and how if the ice sheets, for example, destabilize much quicker, then we might have a sea level rise of 2 meters by the year 2100. Now that is, of course, a disastrous amount of sea level rise. But the phraseology that they used is high impact, low likelihood, which in my personal opinion is just euphemism for we don't really know. And that is also another thing that we scientists tend to do, or researchers tend to do, that we tend to err on the side of caution. And we try to be reticent. We are very cautious not to be called alarmists. But the fact of the matter is that, the situation is alarming, and we need to be able to do justice to that, and we need to be able to communicate that alarmism, not in a constructive way, of course. And this is precisely, in my opinion, what the adaptive pathways, the theme of this conference that we had, which was adaptive pathways, that's the adaptive element of it, that you need to be able to account for the uncertainty and make sure that the infrastructure that you build, or the protective infrastructure that you build, is able to be dynamic and be able to change as our own understanding changes. So those things are very important when it comes to communication, I feel. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. One hopeful message I got from you is that in India, policymakers are thinking 15 years ahead. In my own country, they don't. They only think about the next election. So I'm relieved to know that in India there is much longer horizon. Parisa, if you don't mind, you work in the private sector. So for you, there is a sort of an extra challenge of forging the partnerships that will allow you to work and contribute in this space. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, sure. Actually, I believe that addressing climate change and achieving resilient or disaster-resilient infrastructure need actually the adoption of new technology and capacity building, climate-friendly policies, as well as policy currents, which all of this can happen in a very intensive global partnership. So by through actually global partnership, the countries can somehow catalyze the implementation of climate action plans. So based on the mutual interest, 2 or 3 countries can cooperate to develop a win-win relationship which is actually mutually beneficial. For example, let's say North-South, South-South, as well as triangular cooperation can help the country to somehow increase the transfer, the technology transfer, let's say mitigation and adaptation technology transfer, capacity building, finance, as well as enhancing the policy and institutional coherence. So I can bring you an example that we have partner cities, like for example, Kuala Lumpur. They have a perfect climate action plans, but they're facing with lots of obstacles to implement it on the ground. So we are somehow helping them how to overcome these obstacles through partnership, because we believe that one of the SDG number 17, which is the partnership, is really important, is one of the key drivers to push us in the direction of implementation. So we are bringing the potential partners together and somehow using the different platform to strengthen our partnership. One of the platform that we are using is one of the initiatives of UN Habitat called Urban Thinkers. So we are bringing different partners together. We are finding the mutual interest, and we are learning from each other. For example, city-to-city learning, sharing our knowledge, and not only best practices but also our failure. So, and then it's going to the next level, which is transferring technology as well as know-how, and trying to somehow empower each other to implementing the climate action and, of course, SDGs on the ground. So I'm promoting SDGs because all these actually climate issues are somehow inside the SDGs, and we have to finally take action and not just talking, and through actually a strong partnership we can do that.
Thank you. So maybe as a sort of idea, maybe Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure should be renamed as a Partnership for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So we are hopefully heading in the right direction in that. Cam, I didn't forget you, I apologize. You work in a government research institute, so you're not a 1.5, you're a 1. So when you work in a government research institute, you need to balance the interests of the political system and the incentives that they have with what you might, or your organization might think should be the priorities. So I know this is slightly more sensitive, but luckily, nothing that you will say here will leave this room. Please, by all means, tell us a little bit about your experiences in that direction, in that aspect.
Okay, thank you very much, Ilan. Well, I'm glad that there is no tie here. So, I have freedom of talking. I think the politics is at a number of layers. I would say that, the layers of governmental departments, like the politics among different departments, and the layer of ministries, like the politics among different ministries, and also up to the country level. I mean, when you deal with the politicians. So I'll go with the easiest one first, the one, among the departments. I think I'll come with one of the examples that I've faced lately. We were contacted by one of the offices that are dealing with the policy of the transportation, that they were requested by United Nations Development Program to think a little more about big picture of climate adaptation investment in Thailand. So we decided to do that research with them, because we thought that, okay, UNDP, and then that department and us, so it would be fine. Then we start doing that. So the Office of Transportation Policy said that, okay, so we are doing about climate investment of the roads and the rails. So with the roads, we have two departments, Departments of National Highways, Department of Rural Roads, and then with the rail, we have State Railway, which is actually 1.5, and then so they have different way of working, and then apart from that, we also have another organization, another office for climate change policy, which also we need to work with them because it's about climate adaptation investment. And when we talk about investment, it should not only be decided by the transportation side, but also by the climate change side. So we need to go to interview one by one, and then each one will have each of their own requirements. And then we will need to try to balance all these things. So that's at the department level. And then up to the ministry level. So rails, roads, and Office of Transport Policy are under the same ministry, Ministry of Transportation. But the climate change is under another one, Ministry of Resources and Development. So then when we try to talk about the results that we get from the study, which is the big picture of the climate investment there in Thailand, then they start asking, so who will be coming from the transportation side to open to give the remark? And then, I'll say the Secretary General will come. And then they say, oh, unfortunately, our second Secretary General will not be free at that time, so can you change the day? So we needed to change the day. So these kind of things will happen. And actually, as a researcher, you'll never be thinking a lot about this. And well, we were lucky enough that we are able to push this further. And I'm coming to like the difficult part. So when we talk about real investment, so now we have another office under the ministry that work with the Prime Minister themselves. So for the big projects, big investment, we need to go through that office for them to screen. So they come up and then say that, well, we were talking about capacity building of this climate adaptation investment for the people in all these offices and departments to be able to do the assessment of the climate investment by themselves. And then when we go to this office of the Prime Minister, and then they say that, okay, if you are going to do the capacity building, first you will need to start with the capacity building of us, that how we can look at this kind of big investment when it's related to climate adaptation. So it's like totally, different of what we thought about at first. And I believe that, so for this kind of investment, it's more than $100 million or something like that, but you need to bring into parliament. And then when it get into the parliament, I believe, again, there's a lot of, I think I will have 2 or 3 more stories to tell. And actually, I would say that this is a common problem that we have. Like as researchers, we'll just work with the topic that we would like to do, the topic that we are interested in. But finally, when we talk about implementation, and actually that's one of the themes that we discuss a lot during the conference, it's, the politics is something that you need to think about, and it's at every layer. I mean, layer of the departments, layer of the ministries, and also layer that, you deal with the politicians. And I believe all others also should have very similar experience with me. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may share a very brief story of my own. I moved to New Zealand 10 years ago. And about 3 years into my time in New Zealand was the first time my university received a call from the minister complaining about me. And that's when I knew I was starting to potentially push the envelope. So yes, there are political pressures, and I think it's our duty to try and push it in the direction I think that we all agree we need to pursue. Next, I have a question for all of you. I haven't yet apologized, but I'm an economist. As most economists, I believe that money makes the world go round. So it's a question for all of you, and I don't really have whoever wants to start answering it. Money does make the world go round, especially if we are talking about infrastructure. So do you have any insights about funding and finance and money and how money shapes this agenda? Anyone wants to start?
Yep, got it. Great question. I would like to believe money doesn't make the world go round, but my recent experience and watching the trends in the finance sector, particularly the sustainable finance sector and new agendas around green and sustainable finance emerging globally, I see more action being driven through those changing agendas than through pretty much any other pathway in the last sort of 15, 17 years that I've been doing this. There really are triggering change there. I guess the good news is that the change is happening. Recently the world's largest insurance company announced wanting to insure oil and gas programs, particular types of oil and gas programs, ever globally, and joining other large insurance firms in that space. So these scale of decisions are being made currently, and understanding the links between the work that we're doing and how it can shape some of these discussions is critically important. I think the green taxonomies and guidance that's coming out around sustainable finance, originally developed, out of, for example, the EU, but now spreading globally and in our region as well, is the level of specificity in their guidance around the requirement for a sustainable finance investment to not only not cause damage or not be at risk from disasters or climate, but actually deliver a positive outcome in this space. There are 3 categories, and there are specific criteria for 97 sectors around what a positive outcome in this space is, and it's no longer enough to manage the risks, but you actually have to deliver a benefit in this space. But you have to deliver resilience through your project, not just within your project. So understanding some of those drivers in the finance system and the linkages between the research, adaptive pathways as a theme. I'm so passionate about the fact that adaptive pathways are such a useful tool for investors to manage uncertainty in their timeframes, to help them avoid lock-in of design and emissions. This adaptive pathways concept really speaks to a gap that industry and private sector investors have in knowing how to proceed in this space. So we have a really strong entry point there. We just, as I said earlier, maybe need to package like little mouthfuls of information so that the message can get through, rather than our traditional approach maybe to significant and long documents or quite technical parcels of information.
I think that money absolutely is a very important deciding factor, and it affects decisions. Budgets affect decisions, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure. For example, the one that we worked on, seaports, where it's very highly capital-intensive projects, and so there is a certain amount of what technically is called path dependency. That when you are in the planning phase and you have allocated a certain amount of budget for a particular infrastructure, and then so that's it. Once you've done that, then there isn't really room to add more to that, because when you enter the construction phase and then the production and utilization phase, then that's not when you put in money. That's when you're supposed to utilize the budget and then expect returns over a period of time. And so the lifetime of the infrastructure and when you will get the return on the investment, that is all built into the budget. So once you're past the planning phase, there isn't really much you can do in terms of building resilience and building a protective infrastructure. So it has to be in the planning phase, in the budgeting phase, where you account for resilience and protective infrastructure. Our colleague from USA had a very interesting presentation in the conference where he talked about financing and how if you build in risk reduction into the budget and consider it as an investment and not so much as a cost, because you're saving money at the end of the day by not facing the damages. We need to have that kind of thinking built into our planning and budgeting phase. Because as I said, once it's done, then that's not, after that you don't put in more money, after that you're waiting for the returns. So it absolutely affects decision making in that sense. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll go next. When you look at the climate investment, actually, I think there are quite a lot of money out there, that you can use for the investment. But you also need a lot of money to do the investment because it's about climate-proofing infrastructure. So it's about infrastructure. You're investing on infrastructure. So it's like, you have just dessert for 2 tables here, but all people would like to have desserts. So I think, this makes us think a lot about the resource allocation. So how are we going to distribute this money to all people that really needs it? Based on the prioritization, priority of them. For example, like to the area that are susceptible to risks more, you need to allocate money there more. And actually, I didn't think that these kind of things are the things that all the technical experts need to think about. I'm an engineer, but actually I was talking a lot about investment. I'm not an economist, by the way. But I think also all those people who are working technically about climate adaptation, when we think about adaptive pathway towards this resilience infrastructure, actually all the engineers and also the scientists also need to think more about also this investment. So, well, I know that all of us think that the thing that we are working on are very, very important. But actually, you will also need to see whether it's really important for the people or not. So I think it would be the time for us to start looking broader. I mean, to try to see, well, whether that's needed by the community, whether that's needed by the nations, whether that's needed by the region, whether that's needed by the local government, and then try to use those things to prioritize the usage of the money, and also to prioritize the theme or the topics that you are going to do the research. So I think these are the things that I really got from the conference.
Actually, I had a couple of experience in this regard. For example, I can mention maybe one or two. One of them was, for example, the policymakers, or let's say the municipality, really supporting your idea, and they're really pushing, for example, climate adaptation projects pushing it to the implementation. But when it's reaching to the budget, okay, they're saying, okay, we don't have a budget, what shall we do? Okay, we have to look as a practitioner for the different source of the funding and see what kind of possibility exists. And this is taking a long time, and the project that we already defined it can change because of lots of other factors that can be added into the project. So this is one problem, and the second one is, for example, sometimes we are using a nature-based solution in our project, and convincing the investor is really difficult, because they're sometimes thinking, or most of the time thinking about the return. So they're going to say that, okay, if we make a nature-based solution or green corridors or parks, how we can get our money back, or how we can have an interest. So this is also something that we have to also consider, that when we are pitching our idea, we have to all the time think about the economical benefits, because the investor, this is really important for the investor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. I'm going to throw out a little bit of a provocative idea here, and I don't know if any of you want to pick it up or not. This is some of the previous questions. I'm sure I'm not going to tell you a secret. They already knew that I'm going to ask them, but this one is a surprise. But I think that maybe some people in the audience will want to say something about that as well, and after that we'll open up for questions. So sometimes, well, we know from a lot of evidence that people have very short-term memories, and they forget history very quickly. They don't learn from history very well. And nowadays we talk about climate change all the time, especially in the last few years. But there are actually other risks that have nothing to do with climate. And if you look at, for example, in India, the largest life safety risk has nothing to do with climate change. It's probably earthquakes. So I feel in the last few years that maybe the climate change discussion, while I welcome it, and I think it is definitely urgent and should be a priority, is sucking the air of some of the other issues that we need to deal with. For example, seismic risk in a country like India, or like Iran, or like where I am from New Zealand. So a little bit, any thoughts about the fact that we are now focusing maybe on climate change only, and not sort of forgetting the other risks that we are facing? I don't know if you want to pick this up. If you don't, that's perfectly fine, but any insights here?
Yeah, I can kick off as the climate change practitioner on the panel. To a large extent, I agree in that I think in the drive to focus on climate change, there has been some simplifications of the concepts and the way we approach it, and maybe a lack of understanding of the significance of existing vulnerability in the discourse around, say, for example, climate change adaptation. And the fact that I remember a few years ago, I worked on climate smart agriculture and having the conversation with someone that best practice agriculture, sustainable agriculture, as we know how to do it, is 95% of the way to climate smart agriculture. So the practices that are addressing the existing systemic vulnerabilities, I worked in a project in an Indian city where people were telling me that the project was going to increase the water supply, so it was going to help them deal with climate change. But the question was climate change the biggest driver of water scarcity in that city? And actually uncontrolled urbanization was the bigger driver of water scarcity, not an incremental change in precipitation patterns over a 10 or 30 year period. So I think sometimes it masks, the focus on climate change masks a little what's actually happening in terms of where the vulnerability and exposure sits. I think the risk classifications or the risk definitions that we use can help us dig into some of that. So looking into the IPCC aligned definitions from either a disaster or climate perspective that really understand sensitivity and coping capacity, vulnerability, exposure can be the tool that helps us with some of that. I'm sure others have maybe differing opinions.
Maybe I'll go next then. So I kind of agree with you that in many places, actually, this climate change really will mask the importance of some other topics. Because, actually, again, based on my experience of going out to evaluate, climate resilience, with capacity of the renewable energy infrastructure, we were starting with climate change because that's the trend and that's the thing that normally the top level people are into. So we started there. But when we go talking with operators, and then they say that, okay, the problem that we are suffering a lot is actually the animals, the pests that are eating our cables. That's their problem there at their site. So I think one way of actually dealing with this is localizing the policy. I mean, so the policy itself need to take into account the local context and also the researchers who are working on these kind of topics. I think they need to go to the community. They need to go to the people who are responsible for those infrastructure, and then talk to them, discuss with them that what are the problems that they have. You can go into with climate change in mind, but be prepared to also get some other problems that may become that are I think they are needs, and then try to see that how you can tailor your projects or your research in order to fulfill their needs. I think that's the thing that the researchers can do to help. I mean, alleviating the impacts of people really concentrating too much on climate change.
We're going to go to the Q&A, just an example of why I think climate change might hide other things. There was a presentation yesterday in the conference about solar flares and the risk of solar flares. Who knows anything about solar flares? Here, you're all disaster risk practitioners. This is an incredible risk, and in terms of economic risk, it's a very, very dramatic risk. And it's not a very small likelihood, high impact event. It's actually a pretty high likelihood. This event happens about once every century. And the last big one, the Carrington event, fortunately happened before we had electricity systems. But the next one, we do have electricity systems. Now it's going to fry them all up. And we will have a big problem on our hands. So that's an example of a risk that we're not considering, maybe partly because we're focusing on climate change, or maybe just not have enough bandwidth for everything. Questions from the audience, please. Anyone has any questions? We have some roving mics. If you have any questions, or if you do have, enough about solar flares, you want to educate all of us. Anyone? Please.
Regarding the solar flares, you're right. It would influence all the telecommunications and electricity and power and all. And I understand that there is already a group which are doing the so-called solar flare forecasts by observing the flares of the sun. Thank you.
Yeah, but what we need is a plan for what to deal with it, not just to be able to know that it's coming. Please.
Yeah, so Parisa, you at one point, perhaps unthinkingly, referred to sharing knowledge and sharing knowledge about failures. And then the conversation moved into competing for finance and resource. So to what extent is it easy or difficult to share knowledge about failures? And I'm thinking about this from a learning point of view. We learn more from failures than we do from success, and yet the system is kind of fixed to only support the sharing of success, right? So are there mechanisms for sharing productively around failures across the community?
Yes, actually, can you hear me? Actually, one of the points that we are focusing is failure, because just showing the best practices, okay, what you did, okay, great, but lots of the time we are facing with some challenges that we cannot solve it. So we are bringing these people who had this kind of problem already and failed. They're sharing their knowledge, and we are learning from them. Okay, how you, which kind of way, paths you follow, and why you fail, and what kind of other factors that we never thought about it. So we are adding it into our framework. So step by step, I mean, we are all the time emphasizing that we don't need just successful factors. We also want failure, because as you said, we are learning a lot from the failures than successful factors. So this is one of the major key factors that we are considering in our actually project. And for example, we invited several partners, I'm jumping to Cairo project. We also did something in Cairo. One of our problem was working in an unplanned area, for example. That when we wanted to implement something there, we faced with lots of challenges because they were thinking that we are outsider, we are coming and want to take their flats or apartments. So they were not really helping us. So it was one of the failure we had. We actually come up with some kind of nature-based solution to decrease the urban heat island phenomena in some public spaces there, but they were not really cooperative. So we had to go back and think that how we can solve this problem, how we can convince them, how we can build the trust. We come up with some ideas. We had some locals who could support us. And then we went to the field and convinced them that we just want to help you. We are not from the government. So this kind of things can happen. This is something that
So I can see that working within a project or a program, but what I'm more curious about is whether the community, DRI community at large, has mechanisms for sharing across programs and projects. Because, you know, the politics of that must be amazing.
Yeah, so I've never failed in anything, so I cannot contribute to that. But maybe somebody else from the panel wants to take that up?
Just to say, I agree. I don't think I can think of a space where there would be any driver or willingness from companies or funders I've worked with to publicize, you know, where things haven't worked. Even sometimes to analyze that within the program, there's not even interest in having indicators which might, you know, not be met, and shaping indicators around things that you think are feasible to report something on. So definitely you've hit a system gap there that I think I would feel very keenly on from my experience. Don't have the answer though.
Well, I don't really have a good answer to that, but I believe that one thing that I that I actually learned during a lot of my projects. Well, one of the projects actually I went to a number of communities to assess the resilience of their energy system, which is like an off-grid one. So it's quite difficult to manage. But actually, all those communities are friends. They know each other. So when you are friends, actually, you feel free to share the failures. So I think this kind of gathering that make all of us friends will be like the good way of the providing more platforms for sharing failures. Because when you trust each other, when you are friends, then it's easier for you to share.
Pushp, you don't want to take the theme of failure?
I mean, the other panelists have already added their opinions. I just wanted to say, that, locally we learn a lot from failures. There are, when, for example, your office building gets flooded or, a critical infrastructure is lost due to a cyclone. And, one of the case studies that we did, it was at a port where they lost their breakwaters, which is supposed to be the protective infrastructure. And so they lost a large part of the breakwater because of an unexpectedly strong cyclone. And so they learned a great deal from that. And that's how we also learn in our building codes, for example, that once there is a blip in the data that a particularly strong event occurred, and then you have to change your codes accordingly. But I guess the issue comes when you're sharing internationally, and when you're in a forum where you have to put across you have to put the best foot forward, and you have to kind of say that, oh, look how big my seawall is. So it's I think there the problem is that you only share the things that worked. So that's the challenge that we have.
Okay, my boss here just disappeared, so I think it means that we need to wrap up. Before I ask you to join me in thanking the panel, I just want to propose that we've just founded a new organization called the Partnership for Solar Flare Resilient Infrastructure, and this will be a sister organization to CDRI. I'm incredibly grateful for CDRI for hosting us in the last few days, and I think contributing to a conversation that is not starting and not finishing by any means, but is incredibly important. Please join me in thanking all these panelists, Kam, Lizel, Pushp, and Parisa.
Thank you, everyone. Please settle down. We're going to start the next segment. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a good tea break and you were able to see some of the posters that are set up outside. Talking about the CDRI Fellowship Program, it's a seed grant. It provides financial support peer learning and capacity building opportunities for individuals designing transformative, actionable, and scalable solutions for real-world problems related to the resilience of infrastructure to disasters and climate risks. What we have in the first cohort of fellows is a global, future-ready pool of practitioners who are out there addressing some of the most critical issues that are facing the resilience of infrastructure. The first cohort of fellows comprises 20 teams from 9 countries, and it's completed its fellowship, hence we're here. For a deeper glimpse into the fellowship and the projects that they've been involved in, let's watch this short film. Please play the film.
The CDRI Fellowship Program provides financial support and peer learning opportunities for individuals designing solutions for real-world problems related to the resilience of infrastructure. In 2021, CDRI awarded fellowships to 21 teams from 9 member countries. The first cohort of the fellowship is on the cusp of completing its journey with CDRI. CDRI is proud of the fellows and the knowledge and innovative solutions they have generated through the fellowship program.
Moreover, the topic is more crucial than ever since we're reaching the tipping point where loss of biodiversity due to ecological disruption driven by human activities makes the world prone to zoonotic infections that can lead to pandemics as COVID-19. The CDRI Fellowship has contributed to expand my knowledge on climate adaptive infrastructure and has given me the opportunity to continue exploring the topic from a local perspective in Peru.
Landslides are one of the critical phenomena that frequently lead to loss of life and property as well as causing severe damage to the natural resources and infrastructures. This research conducted with the financial support of the CDRI organization. Every year, landslide in Borneo result in significant economic and social losses like deaths, injuries, and property destructions. The result of this research established an important tool for decision makers, planners, and engineers. They can make rapid and well-grounded decisions to minimize and avoid the damage and losses caused by existing and future landslides.
My CDRI project is on disaster resilience of bridges exposed to climate change and growing traffic load during design life. I started this research because one of the major challenges associated with the development of disaster resilience bridge infrastructure is to account for the bridge health degradation and transient nature of disasters over bridge service life. Results from one of the bridges show that the disaster resilience of the bridge decreases due to both intensity of the disaster and the level of bridge degradation. The outcome of this research has a potential application in maintenance and asset management of bridges.
Nepal is a country that is prone to various disasters such as floods and landslides. Every year, there is huge loss of lives and infrastructure due to these disasters. I'm thankful to CDRI for supporting my research on landslides.
The CDRI Fellowship has been helping us to conduct the research and fieldwork we proposed in Churi Hill region. So I am proud to be a CDRI Fellow.
I am working on a CDRI research project that aims to high altitude wetland inventory for disaster risk reduction in the transboundary Himalayan region. This project considers climate change and its impact on the Himalayan glacier melting and fosters innovation in future wetland inventory. I believe this CDRI project can build up research capacity and promote research excellence in nature-based solutions for mountain disaster risk reduction.
My topic is thermal stress testing of residential building using reference weather data. In today's world, there is a rise in the morbidity and mortality due to extreme climatic conditions such as heat waves and cold snaps. Most deaths that occur in residences or buildings are mainly due to the thermal characteristics of the building and the local environment. To understand the extent of this problem, it is essential for us to identify, capture and predict the extreme climatic events that are happening.
CDRI has given us a platform to conduct long-term research to utmost importance of our Buddhist community, disaster-resilient building construction practices on hilly slopes of Bhutan, a research compliance and recommendation for national adaptation will contribute towards resilient future by creating awareness on hilly settlements, mitigation and adaptation measures which are important in gearing towards resilient infrastructure on hilly settlements.
Our study concentrates on the Western Ghats region in Kerala, one of the most frequent landslide-prone mountain ranges in India. The lack of a reliable landslide susceptibility map in the Western Ghats has led to poor quantification of risk associated with rainfall-induced landslides to the road networks. The study introduces a framework to improve the susceptibility mapping by performing probabilistic slope stability analysis. This would eventually lead to better risk management planning and evacuation strategies during such catastrophes.
We were awarded CDRI Fellowship 2021. We have conducted the research for the efficient disaster response for the Hawkesbury River region and Nepean Valley in Australia. CDRI Fellowship has greatly added value into our research, and we have managed to publish high quality articles in this domain as well. We really acknowledge and appreciate the step of CDRI in supporting the researchers in this domain around the globe.
This is a high frequency transmitting and receiving radio designed for amateur radio frequency bands. During disasters, when all modes of communication fail, amateur radio works. Amateur radio operators will quickly go there during a disaster and ensure communication, reducing mortality, morbidity and infrastructure losses, which we are writing a white paper, and CDRI will help in advocacy.
We are investigating on innovative structural protection system for a resident community against multiple hazards. The endeavor in which we are developing cost-effective sustainable technologies for hospital buildings to ascertain their safety against various potential hazards and improve resilience against extreme events such as earthquake, wind and fire, which is directly relevant to save invaluable human lives. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure has been extending keen support through the CDRI Fellowship, which has helped in establishing research collaboration with Professor Tracy Breaker from the University of California at Berkeley.
I'm a fluvial geomorphologist interested in capturing the dynamics of global rivers. I use satellite imagery to understand the risks that river-related hazards pose to people and to infrastructure. As part of the CDRI Fellowship, I have been developing a web-based application to map and measure shifts in the position of large rivers in the Philippines. The aim of the project is to improve the resilience of infrastructure to the risks from geohazards. Thank you to the CDRI programme and to all collaborators involved in the project.
This project uses Majoli, a river island in Assam. This adaptive strategy helps the local to cope with the flooding and drive their seasonal demands than the relocation of the personnel. Also, this project involves a net zero model for fresh and wastewater management into the system, achieving self-sustenance and scoping for integration of floating farms and energy system through community participation.
India is witnessing its most significant urban expansion in history. Supporting this volume of urbanization requires significant investments in all major infrastructure systems. Hence, the role of urban planning becomes pivotal in taking a long-term integrated view of infrastructure resilience. We are developing a risk-informed urban planning framework. Through our framework, we hope to support the existing development planning process of the city in 3 ways. First, identify the range of disaster and climate variables in the short and long term. Second, assess their broad spatial impacts on major infrastructure systems. And third, connect them to appropriate planning projects.
Our CDRI Fellowship project is developing an index-based tool which will identify the first order risk assessment as well as the zonation of the critical infrastructure in the Eastern Economic Corridor in Thailand. Thanks to CDRI Fellowship for encouraging and supporting the risk and resilience related research in the region.
Our research focuses on integrating plans and strengthening communications through machine learning. So we have developed a smart application, which is a think tank for emergency managers and planners. And it's an intelligent application with natural language processing, where we have taught the machine to learn and understand several hundred emergency management concepts. So we've enjoyed being a part of the first cohort of CDRI's fellowship program, and this opportunity has helped us take plan integration to the next level. And we look forward to continuing our research to build a comprehensive, smart knowledge management portal for governments to streamline their business applications and to execute tasks efficiently during disaster situations.
In Nepal, thousands of landslides occur in the rainy season. The problem is we build infrastructure where we believe it's profitable, but overlook landslides that could impact throughout its life cycle, creating huge losses in the long run. We mapped past landslide locations over several years, and we found that more than half of the landslides are located on roads. We're developing a web portal to disseminate this data set and the map for researchers and decision makers.
Our study is on risk-informed school evaluation tool. We consider school as a critical infrastructure which is often used as a shelter point during disaster times. While choosing schools for our children, we often neglect disaster resilience aspect of the school, so that we want to explore through this study. I am very much thankful to CDRI for providing this opportunity.
Did you know that in 2020, trade, including imports and exports, accounted for over 1/3 of India's total economy? What is even more remarkable is that nearly 95% of this trade travels through the sea. We have 12 major ports and over 200 non-major ports which are spread across our vast coastline, and all of them are critical for India's economy.
In this context, the Government of India last year unveiled its Grand Maritime India Vision 2030, which is focused on building new world-class ports, modernizing existing ports, and promoting port-led industrialization.
And with support of the 2021 CDRI Fellowship, we are conducting a study to assess the impacts of climate change on India's port infrastructure and operations, to generate practical and implementable solutions that could be adopted by individual port authorities and also the Government of India at the policy level to make our port infrastructure more resilient in the face of accelerating climate change.
For the CDRI Fellowship, my team members Meghna, Ananya, Akanksha and I are exploring the potential of a participatory monitoring and evaluation framework using social audits, which puts the users of the infrastructure at the forefront of monitoring, evaluation and learning to build resilience. As economists, my team is interested in exploring the participatory approaches for governance, for disaster resilience, and CDRI has been an excellent platform to start this journey. For a young social scientist, the fellowship provides a unique platform to learn from experienced researchers from across countries and fields.
Thank you so much. And this is the right moment to say that we had the first ever convening in person of our international fellows, our technical experts, and our international jurors. We had some dropouts because of different factors, but I'd like everyone to stand up here, whoever's associated. We have Dr. Ranit Chatterjee, Dr. Sai Bhaskar Reddy, Dr. Dilip Patel, Dr. Rama Pandey, Dr. Parisa Kloss, who represent the technical experts who've guided the fellowship. And I'm missing someone else. I think I'm missing somebody here. And of course, the international jurors, Professor Nishikawa, and Dr. Silva, Dr. Akam, you've been on the stage. I'm so sorry about that. These are our technical experts who really guided the fellows, Professor Nishikawa, Professor Ravi Sinha, and the fellows themselves scattered around the room. So a big round of applause for everyone. And we miss the people who are not here. But now I would like to invite some of our fellows to share their experience live with you all. So I would like to also call on Professor Ravi Sinha, our international jury member, to help guide the discussion. And the people I'm calling on are, we have Richard Boothroyd, Monica Thapa, and Vasant Matsaga. Thank you so much, and floor all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me first take the opportunity to thank CDRI
for the fellowship program, which you'll hear a bit more about. The world is changing. The future is not going to be like the past. So how do we leverage past knowledge to fully tackle the future? It's not possible. Future has to be tackled through the knowledge of today and tomorrow. And the CDRI Fellowship Program is an important step and contribution in that direction in the domain of disaster reduction. The CDRI Fellowship Program is a unique program intended to attract the most young at heart, irrespective of their age, who are dedicated to the cause of disaster reduction of infrastructure. And we are very fortunate that we had a very large number of outstanding applications to select the first cohort from. And quite fittingly, in the year 2021, 21 fellows were selected to form the first cohort of the CDRI fellows. And some characteristics I would like to share about the fellowship program. First of all, it represents the diversity of the world in terms of their background, as well as in terms of the interest in what areas of infrastructure they want to address. Secondly, the CDRI Fellowship, as was mentioned in the film, it's like providing a seed grant for a very complex topic. So the expectation is that the CDRI Fellows are going to be lifelong ambassadors, not just of CDRI, but also of disaster resilient infrastructure. They are going to be committed to promote resilience of infrastructure in whatever walks of life they are going to continue with. And the CDRI program itself is very unique and in some ways quite different from many of the other fellowship programs. First of all, it's a one-year intense fellowship and made doubly intense by the consistent and incessant follow-up by the CDRI team with the fellows to ensure that they are up on their toes and they are constantly contributing to the task. So the CDRI fellowship has resulted in tremendous amount of output in the one-year time, and the CDRI team's efforts in ensuring that should be acknowledged, and perhaps is a good practice to be adopted elsewhere also. Secondly, again, a unique feature of the CDRI Fellowship program, you saw the names and you saw the people that CDRI identified a number of highly accomplished mentors who would work with the fellows where required and who would help to crystallize the work proposed by the fellows to result in something which is tangible within a one-year time period. So working on such complex problems, there is often a tendency that a one-year time period is just to understand the problem better, maybe make a few incremental achievements. In the case of CDRI Fellowship, the one-year time period was to make a significant achievement, to have a significant contribution in the work which they are doing. And that was all thanks to the very strong support and guidance provided by the mentors. So, so that is another very unique feature of the fellowship program, that we have this quality of mentors who are committed to spending so much time. I was informed about some of the mentorship meetings over video conference, of course, starting at 10:30 p.m. and going up to 4 o'clock in the morning. So I think in addition to whatever recognition has already been given to the mentors so far, we should all show our appreciation again to the mentors. And today in this session, you will get a glimpse of the kinds of activities and the process through which the CDRI Fellowship Program has developed. And for that, we have 3 CDRI fellows with us. Maybe in recognition of the fact that I am from the academic community, the CDRI's team has ensured that I am not going to be out of depth by having non-academic people in this panel. So all three are with academic background. We have Richard Boothroyd. He's a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Glasgow in UK. We have Vasant Mustagar. He is a professor at IIT Delhi in India. And we have Ms. Monica Thapar, and she is a lecturer at Royal University of Bhutan. And all of them, in very diverse ways, have really had outstanding achievements of the problems which they have attempted to tackle through the fellowship program. So we will, the way we will conduct this very short session is that first, I will request them to take maybe 2 or 3 minutes time to describe what is it that they were trying to do and why. And then we will have a few more rounds of discussion regarding the work we have done, they have done. So first, I would request Richard to explain the problem he tackled. So Richard, over to you.
Thanks very much. Hi everyone, I'm Richard. I'm a geographer from the UK, and I'm really interested in shifting rivers and the threats and hazards they pose for infrastructure and people. So the fellowship has really been looking at monitoring shifting rivers around critical bridge infrastructure in the Philippines. And it's a well-known fact that rivers are really dynamic in Southeast Asia. Lots of sediment gets into the rivers, they shift across floodplains. But often when we're monitoring bridges, we just look over short time periods. So we might look at 5 years or 10 years of how the river might change around the bridge. And as part of the fellowship, I've been using satellite imagery to really try and look back through time and understand how rivers shift around bridges. And that's really important because bridges are such expensive forms of infrastructure. And usually we try and design bridges to be as short as possible to try and minimize the costs. So by developing a web application that uses satellite imagery, we can be a little bit more strategic in where we position bridges and try and work with hazards, work with risk, and strategically place those forms of infrastructure. And it's been a really exciting fellowship program, and we've been developing a web application that's user-friendly, open to anyone, and really committed to open access data. So by the end of the project, we've released the Earth Engine application so anyone can use and apply across scales. So although the project was designed for the Philippines, the idea is that we can scale it globally and apply it in other settings that experience shifting rivers. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. We will move to Vasant. Vasant, the problem which you tackled is intended to ensure that the preparedness after an earthquake disaster improves drastically. So can you explain a bit about your project?
Yeah, so in my project in the CDRI fellowship, we dealt with the health infrastructure, where our objective was to improve the multiple hazard resilience of hospital buildings. So typically we have seen that the conventional technologies that are used, all the hospital buildings, they are put in the same category of critical infrastructure, wherein if I take example of earthquake resistivity or performance of the structures against earthquakes, it is in the immediate occupancy criteria, performance criteria. However, through this research work, we have realized that hospital buildings needs to be distinguished from the other critical infrastructure, and it has to be put in a operational performance criteria. And it should not be seen only from one hazard viewpoint, that is earthquake, but it is also important to look into other hazards that that hospital building would be experiencing during its service life of about 100 years or so. And other hazards which are more pertinent in this case, which will be site-specific or scenario-specific, such as that from windstorms or from the fire that may occur accidentally. So we have investigated into this problem and tried to see that it requires a completely different treatment in order to improve the resilience of the hospital building. Also, from the user's perspective, we cannot compare, for example, those patients which are having impaired mobility with those which are healthy. They can quickly sense the threat, and they can immediately evacuate the building. However, patients may not be able to do so. And even if there is some minor damage that may occur in a structure, in a building that those patients are housed, it might cause some severe consequences, which might even lead to fatalities. Even a small lump of concrete, if it falls on somebody, so it might be quite catastrophic. So we address this problem, and the conventional technologies that are available for improving the structural resistance, they are not adequate, as we have sensed through this project, and that made us to innovate on new type of technologies which will ensure safety, life safety in particular, of the patients in the hospital buildings.
Thanks, Vasant. Moving to Monica. So Monica, your work, it addressed the needs of the mountain community, and you found that there are some very unique risks of the mountain communities which need to be addressed. So can you tell us a bit about it?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, good afternoon, delegates, senior members, CDRI fellow, ladies and gentlemen. I would really like to thank CDRI for providing us the platform where we can express our needs and requirements and also collaborate with all the partners across the globe. And I really thank CDRI for this opportunity. Now moving on to the requirements for the needs of my country, actually my project, which was actually disaster resilient building construction practices on hilly slopes of Bhutan, a recommendation for national adaptation, which actually came from a problem, like we being the hilly regions, we have a lot of landslides, and if I just narrate that there were casualties, and then people died in 2021 during the monsoon because of the urban landslide at their homes, and then also in 2022, and that is a serious problem. When there is no problem, there is nobody's job, but when there is problem, everybody needs to be blamed. So it's better that you have mitigation measures in place. And then we always believe that Bhutan believe in a very sustainable development, and this is one of the steps that can be taken into consideration. And if I just narrate again, we were not having much of the snowfall, but in 2021, 2020 to 2022, recently last year, we even had a very heavy snowfall that was recorded, and also we had snowfalls in areas where they were not expected. And this monsoon we had very, very heavy rainfall, and there were landslides in areas which didn't have before. So these are some of the concerns, and maybe it might be due to climate change, and this has been happening every year. So our research actually looked into the constructional practices and mitigation measures that can be considered taken into consideration regarding the slope, the angle, the drainage pattern, the soil condition, the terrain, and all those things, and how you can actually implement those in the constructional practices so that it will minimize the risks in the event of disaster. And recently in the monsoon, we had just a construction nearby our college, and the excavation usually is unplanned excavation, and then we had a lot of debris moving to the road, and people has channelized those using the sandbags to proper drainage, and that has mitigated to some extent the problem of debris flow and then road blockage and all those things. So these are some of the, and then we have also done the awareness program involving many of the stakeholders where they fully agreed with this, and I would still like to continue with this research. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica. So as you can see that this is a panel of academicians who are doing real life work. And indeed, this is one of the hallmark of CDRI fellowship program, that the people from various backgrounds, all of them contributing to solving real problems on the ground. But then, at least for a community like this is moving out of your comfort zone. So, Richard, what made you go for a project like this? Because obviously, this is not something which is normally considered as a way to a successful academic career.
Well, I didn't really know too much about the project or the fellowship to begin with, so it was a bit into the unknown. But it's been a fantastic journey. I think the opportunity to work across disciplines has been one of the key factors. So I'm a geographer. It's been great to work with engineers, sociologists, every different discipline imaginable, really, and just gain different perspectives of resilience. As well as that, the international aspect, to work with people from across the globe. Not often it's possible to do that in fellowships in the UK, so this is, again, a fantastic experience. And I think working with people at different career stages and different sort of work histories is really interesting too. So moving beyond just working in academia, working with practitioners on the front line, it's just been a brilliant experience.
Monica, as part of your work, you had to interact with the people at the ground level, in the villages, in the towns. This is very different from what an academician normally does. And also, in fact, very different from what is a typical practice where people try to do more things in the offices and the ground level touch is often missing when things are being done with technology. So can you give some instances of, say, a unique learning or insight you got because of the interaction with the local people?
It was a very great journey, and especially a very great experience for me. And because of one thing is the COVID. And then we could learn a lot from it. Even if you have fun, you have the restrictions of going somewhere outside, and you do not have people to work. The money is useless. That's something that we learned. So because of COVID, there were many restrictions, and we had to undergo a lot of difficulties to go to field, undergoing a lot of quarantine, and then transit and all those things. But overall, it was a very, very great experience. And when we went to ground, I think most of the departments whom we approached were very, very supportive. And even the people who were at ground were concerned about their areas and their safety. So it was really a great experience, and all gave a very, very positive response. And even in awareness program, people gave a very positive response. And then we are sure that safety comes with a cost, and this was a very great experience for me. I learned a lot from it. Thank you.
Vasant, moving to your work, so unlike many other projects which result in your knowledge, your work resulted in a new innovation, in a new technology. So do you think it would have been possible to do the way you have done if it was not for CDRI fellowship? So can you say something about the value of CDRI fellowship for this specific work?
Yeah, so in our research work, we were able to collaborate across the boundaries of country, and we were in a position to learn from the experiences and the knowledge developed in the other parts of the world. Particularly when I was interacting with other collaborators, even Ellen has mentioned during our deliberations, that there are specific regulations for health infrastructure and particularly for hospital buildings in other parts of the world, whereas in India, as of now, we do not have such kind of specific regulations for health infrastructure. So there was a lot of learning which was facilitated through the CDRI fellowship, as well as we were able to cover almost the complete spectrum of research work and efforts required in development of the technology. We were able to develop that kind of deep technology, which led to filing one US patent on this. And it is specifically addressing the needs of infrastructure required for in the health sector. But as Professor Nishikawa also was mentioning, that patents, papers need not necessarily save lives. And therefore, during our project journey, we also went to the field. We interacted with the persons who are working in the construction industry, and saw as to what are their challenges in adopting these new technologies that we have developed. We visited the hospital, saw the ground realities, and whether they are in a position to handle the different kinds of hazard that they might experience. And we came to realize that yes, a lot is required to be done at the ground level. There might not be such a need at research level. There is ample amount of research already carried out. There are solutions available, but those solutions are still probably within the boundaries or within the walls of the laboratories. They have not been realized in real life practice. So we wanted to carry out that kind of a translational research. And as an outcome of that, we made some efforts. And fortunately, one industry collaborator in this project, he gave us a project of rupees 1 crore to develop a mobile exhibition where we can take this technology to the end users, to the stakeholders for letting them know as to this is one part is of course that engineering based research, but this is something that we have done for them and they should be able to utilize in their day-to-day activities, such as even constructing the hospital buildings, for example. So we were able to realize the technologies that we have developed, the deep technologies that we have developed, to take them to the field implementation.
Very impressive. My background is that of a structural engineer. And when a structural engineer says that we learned a lot, it typically means that the structure had collapsed. So this is a totally different case where we can proudly say that we learned a lot because things worked so well. And I would just like Richard to reflect on what is the future now, what is next, and what kind of message you would like to give to the next cohort of CDRI fellows on the basis of your experience.
I think just to get as involved as possible. So we had a community of practice working on nature-based solutions. That was like in addition to the fellowship. And that started around, I think, October time last year. And it's just these other avenues that you can pursue. So there's lots of people, lots of specialists that you can work together with, learn from, and really co-produce that knowledge. So I think, yeah, just get as involved as possible and really go in with an open mind. And just, you'll see the passion of everyone that's involved in the fellowship. So, yeah.
And Monica, what message would you like to give to the next cohort?
Yes, disaster and resilience, it is a very, very diverse field. But the focus is that we work for community, and that's a great job. And please keep doing it, and that will provide you a very great satisfaction at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, Vasant, we would also like to hear from you.
Yeah, so since last 2 days, we have been discussing that this is not just a commitment for 1 year of the CDRI fellowships. Now we are the ambassadors, and it is a lifelong commitment to work towards the disaster risk resilience. So the next cohort is kind of joining our team, our family of CDRI, and taking this mandate forward.
That's a very, very nice way of putting it. And so I would request all of you to show our appreciation, not just to the 3 fellows here, but to all the fellows through a big round of applause. I would now like to conclude by thanking CDRI. I feel extremely privileged to get the opportunity to be here to moderate this session, so I would like to thank CDRI for it. And I would also like to thank all of you for encouraging the CDRI fellows by listening to them, and hope that you would continue to advise CDRI to reach greater heights. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ravi Sinha. Thank you to all the panelists, the fellows. And just to say that the CDRI Fellowship Program is open to everyone, not just researchers, practitioners. We haven't really set criteria. Anybody who has a solution that can be applied, can be scaled, that can help impact lives through more resilient infrastructure. I would like to call Professor Nishikawa to come quickly and just share his insights. He's been responsible with the selection of the second cohort. So, Professor Nishikawa.
Thank you. My name is Satoru Nishikawa. I serve as one of the international jury members for the fellowship program. And I really would like to thank CDRI for inviting me to participate in this very important opportunity. And I would like to congratulate the fellowship cohort for 2021 and 2022. And I really like to expect new research findings from all of the selected programs. And they are very unique, and they are very innovative, and they are very challenging. And I would like to also request a good interaction with the target group or the target audience or the target localities that they are dealing with. Disaster reduction or resilience is about reality on the ground. And so the output from the fellowship programs should not be just limited to an academic paper. We expect a very positive change to be realized on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Nishikawa. And now we've come to the moment that we've all been kind of waiting for, the convocation of the fellows of the cohort 2021-22. I would like to call on stage Mr. Amit Prothi, Director General, CDRI. I would also like to invite Shri Muhammad Noor Rahman Sheikh, Joint Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Shri Noor Rahman Sheikh is a career diplomat. He is currently deployed as the Joint Secretary, Economic Diplomacy in the Ministry of External Affairs. Among his past assignments, he has served as Consul General of India in Jeddah, and also at the Permanent Mission of India, New York, and the Embassy of India, Amman. In his earlier assignment in headquarters in Varna Division, he handled India's bilateral relations with Egypt, Israel, Jordan, etc. I would also like to mention that we have Ms. Veena Reddy amongst us. She is the USAID Mission Director and Executive Committee Co-Chair. I think she's... Okay, so now I will call, like I said earlier, we have 15 teams represented here. 5 teams could not make it, unfortunately. So in alphabetical order, I'll call your names, so please do come up on stage. First, we have Deepa Srinivasan and Andrew Estrain. Please keep clapping. Thank you so much. Next, we have Dr. Indrajit Pal, Professor Joyshri Roy, and Mr. Anil Kumar. Next, we have Dr. Kailash Gupta ji. Next, we have Mr. Kshitij Dehel and Mr. Kaushal Gyanwali. So Mr. Kshitij Dehel represents Nepal when we come to the country membership. Next, we have Ms. Monica Thapa from Bhutan. Her other team members are Kirtan Adhikari, Sonam Chaudhen, K.S. Babu Narayan, and Sunil B.M. Next, I'd call on stage Dr. Pushp Bajaj and Dr. Chime Udon from India. Next, we have Dr. Richard Boothroyd, Dr. Richard D. Williams, and Professor Trevor Hoy from the UK. Next, we have Dr. Santosh Subhash Palmate. He's working in Texas, but he is Indian origin. Next, we have Mr. Shuja Rahman and Mr. Sridhar Subramani from India. Next, we have Ms. Shweta Lal from India. I'd like to call on stage Ms. Srishti Singh, who also, her other team members are Ms. Ananya Goel, Meghna Yadav, and Akanksha Vazani from India. Next, I'll call on stage Ms. Supriya Krishnan, who's working in the Netherlands but is an Indian by origin. I'll call Dr. Vasant Matsaga to come back on stage from India. I'll now call upon Mr. Vipul Nakkum, Saki Isetani, and Hane Soma from India and Japan. Mr. Vipul Nakkum is representing the team. Now I call upon, finally, Shri Yogendra Subedi ji and his team member Anushta Shrestha. They represent Nepal here. Thank you so much. And I'd request a quick photo where we can call all the fellows, our technical experts, and our international jurors. So please stay here. We'll have a picture with the dignitary. Please come on stage, everyone. And just to mention the teams who are not present, but we do remember them: Ahmed W.A. Hamad, Riza Yosia Yasundijo, and Hafiz Suleiman Manawa from Australia, Luisa Cristina Wong Lent from Peru, Mohammed Javed Nambizada, Ali Niksad, and Hasina Nasri from Afghanistan, K. Nitish, Abhijit A. and Rakesh J. Pillai from India, and Swagata Banerjee Basu from India. Our best wishes to you all. Come, Mona. Now, before we end, I will request the Joint Secretary, Shri Sheikh, to please share his reflections on the event today, the fellowship, any thoughts that he has. Thank you.
Good afternoon, namaskar. I would basically like to convey my heartiest congratulations to all the fellows on having completed excellent studies projects as part of this cohort. And I think you have set a very good pathway for the next set of fellows that will be undertaking fellowship under the CDRI fellowship program. And we at the Government of India is very happy to see that the progress of CDRI is trying to fan out through fellowship programs and various other activities that CDRI does. And I think for that, we certainly would like to place our sincere thanks to all of you for having worked very hard through these times when we require your thoughts, your research, your findings. I think most of all the projects that were shown in the video as well as in the booklet that we got, I mean, those are very useful and very impactful for humanity, and can be applied in across the board around the world. So I would like to congratulate once again to all the fellows here, and like to thank CDRI, led by DZ, Mr. Amit, and his team for having organized this event in the last, today being the third day and the last day. I see that a lot of work has gone in for such a program, the convocation, as well as the various discussions and deliberations that took place. From the MEA, from the Government of India's perspective, we're very happy at the way how things are fanning out, and you have set a very good example for the fellowships, for the future fellows that will come and follow your path. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for your motivating words. And finally, we have the closing remarks from Mr. Amit Prothi, our Director General. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aishwarya. It's always hard to actually close such a wonderful, I think that photograph should have been the closing, because just to see everybody on stage, to see the amount of work that's actually gone into this, this has been a really, really, really impressive cohort of not only individuals, but the mentors, the team. It's really, for me, a very proud moment, because this is actually one of our first, CDRI is actually relatively new. And to see something like this not only being conceptualized, but then being actually delivered during COVID, and then to see all of the, the films were impressive. I think all of you who are working on this on the ground, I want to commend you, because none of this is easy. So, I think a round of applause for all of you. I also want to acknowledge, we've had a very, very rich set of discussions for the last 2 days. And I want to acknowledge people who've come, from far and wide, but also from India. Somebody from the US, somebody all the way from Colombia, New Zealand. New Zealand looks nearby, but it's actually not, right? It takes a long time to get there. So all of you who've arrived here during, this is our first technical conference, and just participating in some of these discussions has been very, very enriching, not only for me, but I think also for the team and for each of you, because we are continuing a journey, continuing a dialogue that is incredibly important. So I want to thank all of you also for giving us your serious time, deliberating openly, honestly, comfortably, confidentially. I think all of those are really important, especially when you ask that question, Alan, are we actually learning from our mistakes? I mean, hell, there are lots of mistakes we are making, right? So we need to learn from that. So I really do appreciate that, and I hope that CDRI continues to give you that space where we can discuss these issues of DRI, which is still an evolving field for a lot, essentially evolving field, to be able to do that in an open manner. So I really appreciate all of your time and effort as well. I won't keep you long, because I really want us to get to lunch. I know I can start to hear people's stomachs grumbling, maybe. But I also want to share that what we've started is not just a start. We actually will be expanding on not only the fellowship program, but we're really very seriously building a network of academic universities to see how we can actually build not only knowledge in the DRI space, but one of my favorite terms is actionable research. We really need to demonstrate on the ground the difference we're making through this research. And you'll see CDRI over the next couple of months sharing another concept that's actually going to be a bigger push towards a network of academic universities, which I'd like all of you to participate in. So we're learning from the fellowship program, we're learning from the technical conference, and we're really going big in this particular domain of disaster-resilient infrastructure, knowledge, research, action on the ground. I think that's really, that whole link is really important, and we're going to be pushing that really hard. I do want to sort of acknowledge the partners in the room. I think none of this works. The SDG 17, as was mentioned, CDRI is all about partnerships. So I want to acknowledge, Government of India has always been a big supporter, of course. And so MEA, MHA, thank you for coming and sharing in this experience today, because I think it's important for you also to see how we are performing and be inspired and continue to support us and continue to partner with us. It's funny, some of that partnership is as simple as somebody's visa is stuck, and then we are chasing somebody to say, can we get that visa processed, right? But these little things are actually helping us succeed, and I want to acknowledge that. Similarly, our member countries, we had several ambassadors in the room sharing, in this experience, because essentially they are our ambassadors on the ground, pushing amongst their countries why it's important to be part of CDRI and why their constituents should be participating in the fellowship, participating in research activities. So they are also very critical for us as partners, and I want to thank them for coming today. Lastly, of course, I want a couple of people in the room to be standing up so that we can all acknowledge and thank them for all of the hard work they've put in to get where we are now. So I'm going to start basically, this is all my team, this is my people who are close to me. Ratnesh, where are you? Aishwarya, Mona, Avinash, Aparajita, Neha, Deepak, Sumit, Anand, Renu, Ravi, Malika, Hemant, Tilak, and this last name, she joined us a week ago, is Gitika, who's really been in this as well. So I think thank you to all of you, and thank you to all of you who've come and participated and contributed to our success, our collective success. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Amit. And now we break for lunch. Before that, I have a couple of announcements. This lanyard that you have, we believe in a circular economy. So if you don't want to take it with you, just leave it. We'll reuse it. Second, lunch is served on the ground floor. And third, I think some of us who are traveling might have misplaced some items. They're at the reception, at the registration desk, I'm sorry. And also for the CDRI team, we'd like a picture really. So everyone who's been mentioned by Amit should come on stage for a picture. Yeah, who? Anybody else who's been there? Everyone CDRI, although everyone CDRI, the family is here. Come on, Alpana, everyone, come. Come on stage. And lunch is served on the ground floor, so yay.
Let's have a group of everybody on stage. Come.
So while we assemble for the photograph, so there's information on logistics. In the Shakuntalam hall where we are having lunch, there is a counter for your luggage and all, so you can inquire about it there. Thank you.